I am a huge proponent of reading the Bible. I think that Christians ought to be in the Bible every day, reading it, studying it, thinking about it, meditating on it, and adjusting their life according to what it says. And that brings me to the topic of this particular teaching, which is a controversy that's in Christianity, pretty well known in Christianity, and it's called the King James only controversy. And the basis of the King James only controversy is that there are people who teach the King James Version is the only Bible in English worth reading. It's the only good translation, and all the other versions are, at best, not worth reading, and at worst, harmful. Now, I don't think that what I'm going to say here is going to change the mind of someone who is a dyed-in-the-wool King James only person. There are many, many books on the subject, histories on the subject, and if those haven't changed people's minds, then this 10 or 20 minutes is not going to do it. But there are other people out that might be listening to this video who are confused, who've had someone come to them and say, you shouldn't be reading that Bible, you ought to be only reading the King James, and they don't know, and they don't understand, and they're confused. And it's to you people that I want to speak, because I want to give you confidence in the modern Bibles that you could be reading. Now, you can also get truth from the King James Bible. One of the amazing things about the whole King James argument is for all the vehement talk and the accusations that get thrown back and forth, everybody's Bible agrees on the basic doctrines. Everybody's Bible says salvation comes through Jesus Christ. Everybody's Bible says to pray. Everybody's Bible says to fellowship with other Christians. Everybody's Bible says to give of your time and your resources. There just doesn't need to be this kind of vehemence. And everybody's Bible, by the way, says that we're to speak kindly to one another and not make all kinds of false accusations. So I'm doing this teaching in two parts. This first part I want to talk about the Greek text of the New Testament. In the second part I'm going to talk about the background, the English Bible background of the New Testament. We need to define our terms. A manuscript is when someone would sit down with a copy or another manuscript of the Greek New Testament, and they would copy. And it would be the work of one man or woman copying the manuscript of the Greek New Testament, and that's a manuscript. A redacted text or an edited text is where an editor takes a bunch of manuscripts and makes some choices as to which is right and which isn't right, and then puts together an entire Greek New Testament. The first published Greek edited text was done in 1516 by a man named Erasmus. Now, first of all, Erasmus's text, now this is incredibly important because it's going to become really the basis for the King James Version. He used very few Greek manuscripts, very few, perhaps less than half a dozen, and none earlier than 1300. In other words, these were not early manuscripts. These are later manuscripts. In fact, for a part of the book of Revelation, he had no Greek manuscript at all. So he took his Latin Vulgate, translated it into Greek, and used that as part of his manuscript. Now, as new Greek text turned up later, he took that Greek manuscript of 1516 and revised it 4 different times. After him came a man named Stephanus. Now, Stephanus took Erasmus's text and revised it, and he did 4 revisions of his own manuscript as well. And we best know Stephanus for his 1551 edition, because in 1551 he took the Greek text, which up till then had no verse markings in it, no verse divisions at all. And in 1551 Stephanus put verse divisions in the Greek text. Now when modern scholars today come along and say, this verse shouldn't be divided that way, then what they're doing is they're saying in the 1500s, Stephanus made a wrong choice about where to divide the Greek, and in many cases it looks like he did. Along then, the next person that we know in the line here, the history of the Greek text on which the King James is based, is Theodore Beza. He was the successor to John Calvin. In the 1560s, he did a Greek text, and he relied heavily on Stevens. So Beza relied on Stevens, Stevens relied on Erasmus. Erasmus had a few late manuscripts of the Greek New Testament. The translators of the King James Version then relied heavily on Beza's text. Now, so they have Beza's complete Greek edited text, and they also had fewer than 25 other Greek manuscripts from which to compare and build the King James Version. So by the time you look at the King James Version and the manuscript basis of it, you've got 25 or less manuscripts that the translators of the King James themselves were using, plus basically Beza's text, which was an entire New Testament, which was a revision of Stephanus, a revision of Erasmus. So the New Testament texts, the Greek text from which the New Testament was translated, were very, very late. Now let's compare the 25 or so Greek manuscripts that the King James translators had in 1611 to what we have today, when we have more than 5,000. I think at latest count it was like 5,600 Greek manuscripts compared to 25. Now, are we seriously going to say that the 25 manuscripts or less that were available to the King James translators were better? That there were no changes, no additions, nothing that we've learned from finding more than 5,500 more manuscripts? That's really not logical. All the oldest uncials like Sinaiticus, Alexandrius, Vaticanus, those hadn't been found yet. None of the papyri had been found. Wow, we can do a much better job now from a Greek text perspective. By the way, perhaps you've heard that the King James translators used the Textus Receptus. Actually, that's not exactly true. In 1624, Bonaventure and Abraham Elzevir produced a Greek text. In their second edition in 1633, they said in their introduction that this text has been received by all, and it was known as the received text, or Textus Receptus, or as scholars call it, the TR. Now what happened was, because the Elzevir brothers had used the earlier Greek texts from Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, then the tradition of the Textus Receptus goes back to the King James, back to the early manuscripts, and then becomes the basis of the King James. But in fact, the Textus Receptus itself didn't exist when the King James was translated. So for example, in the MacArthur Study Bible is this little statement: the King James New Testament was based on the traditional text of the Greek-speaking churches, first published in 1516. That's Erasmus's 1516 text, and he had a few late manuscripts. Now we have over 5,600 Greek manuscripts and other things upon which to base our translation. And by the way, as we've discovered more and more Greek texts, not only about the Bible, but Greek texts have been discovered about many other things as well. I mean, there was the whole Greek-speaking world out there, and the field of archaeology wasn't even really developed until the 1800s. So as these things are discovered, what happens is we clarified a lot of our understanding of what even the Greek word means. Remember, in 1611, it's not just having a Greek text, you've got to bring that Greek text into English. And so, for example, in 1886, when Robert Thayer produced his Greek lexicon, he listed 767 Greek words that he didn't have any equivalent in secular Greek. Now there's fewer than 50. So we know what those words mean better than we did when the King James was translated. So in summary, today we have a better, sounder Greek text from which to translate the modern versions, and you and I can read them, commune with God from them, believe them, and get blessed.